Thank you, Becky Jennings, so much for coming on to The Classroom Matters. This is your host, Kristy Houle, and I'm excited to have you on the show again.
I'm excited to be back, and especially talking about this topic.
Well, last time you were on the show, we actually hinted to this topic because you're very passionate about teaching children to read, and I'm passionate about teaching kids how to read, even more so now that I've had to actually teach a child how to read. When I started homeschooling him, it was a lot harder than what I thought. But, now we are in some really uncertain times with all of these children that are in the process of learning how to read and continuing to be fluent readers that are now at home trying to learn from a distance learning perspective from teachers and having parents help. So I want to dive into that topic with you tonight about the challenges of reading and teaching reading from home. So give me a little bit of background of how your interest grew in that or sort of what your experience is with that.
Well, I guess I grew up in a family with lots of books. And my fondest memories as a child were, reading, being read to it at night, and then reading with my parents at night before bed, and as a parent, I did that with my children as well, and that's so important, because that time is special time, but it creates a love for reading, and reading is so important, because if we can read, we can learn, and if we can learn, we can do anything. Mm-hmm. So reading is something that hopefully is something that should bring pleasure to people, but it's also an essential, really critically important life skill. In fact, there are studies that have correlated someone's reading level to their income and earnings as an adult, and the higher their reading level, the more higher paid type of job they had. So mm-hmm. it's a critical skill.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that reading is one of the most difficult things to teach a child to do, or one of the easiest things to teach?
It's a really difficult thing to teach. And it's made complicated by the fact that there has been a lot of research about reading lately. In 2005, the National Reading Panel did a comprehensive study and released what is now known as the 5 pillars of reading, which define the 5 components of reading. And the fact that there are 5 separate skill sets that are required to be a proficient reader, and that they all have to work together in order for someone to be a proficient reader. It's a complex subject to teach, because it's a very complex skill to learn. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So for any of our newer audience members that might be parents or even teachers that are listening that have not been in a position to have to really worry about teaching reading, can you give us a little quick snippet of what those 5 pillars of reading are, and maybe just a few sentences about each one?
I will. Yeah, thank you. And I think that's a good place to begin, because in order to really understand the skill of reading, it's important to know each of those 5 components. So the 5 components are: phonemic awareness is the first, and I'm explaining them in order of the way people learn as well. Mm-hmm. Phonemic awareness is a complicated term for sounding and sounding out, and the sound of reading.
Yeah.
When we're reading, we're hearing it in our head. So sound is a very important component of reading. And that begins with first knowing the sounds of each letter, and then connecting those sounds to letters, and then syllables and parts of words. So that sounding out process, knowing the individual sounds of letters and then the high frequency spelling patterns of letters, is critically important. The next skill is phonics. So whereas phonemic awareness is all about sound, phonics then is all about the 26 letters that make up the English language and result in over, I think the last time I checked, like 1.5 million words from 26 letters. I don't know. That's pretty incredible to think about. But explicit instruction in phonics is what the research has very clearly said is the most effective learning strategy to teach reading. So knowing the letters, knowing those high frequency combinations of letters, and then being able to connect that back to the sound. It's the sound symbol association. Here's something that's interesting. Obviously, 26 letters can make up to 15,000 syllables in English, but there are 44 most common sound and letter combinations. So when we talk about explicit phonic instruction, we're focused on first learning those individual 26 letter sounds and then those 44 high frequency letter combinations. So sound out and then be able to look at letters and connect to sound. And that's critical to decoding and the next step of the process, which is fluency. And fluency is important because if a person can look at a word and recognize it and sound that out, then it means that they are able to understand what they're reading. But if a person is not able to look at a word and they have to stop to sound it out, letter by letter or syllable by syllable, this research is very clear that it is impossible for someone to decode and comprehend simultaneously. So when reading with our children, if the child has to stop and look at the letter and figure it out, or look at the sounds and figure it out, it means that they're still struggling with how to read and they're not going to be able to understand what to read. The fourth step of the process is vocabulary. And that's now associating meaning to those words that we've been able to look at and automatically decode. So parents, when you're working with your kiddos, it's important that you work, yes, on the sounds and recognizing the letters, but when you're working with whole words, also talk about the meaning of the words. Because vocabulary can actually account for up to 60 to 70% of comprehension. And then the fifth, the last reading skill, is comprehension. But you can't comprehend unless you have those foundational skills of phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, and vocabulary. So that's reading 101.
That was a good lesson.
Good.
Actually. Well, and I think that
really long time to learn and be able to put it together. But once you get it, you understand how all 5 pieces are critically, and if any of one of the 5 pieces is missing, then comprehension cannot happen.
Right. And I think that it's important, and I'm glad that you pointed this out. These 5 pieces do all have to loop together, and it may seem difficult to grasp at first when you say to a parent who's got a first grader or a kindergartner, okay, well, now we have to continue to teach this child how to read. At first, they might really stress about that. But really, once you understand those 5 pillars or 5 components, it's not all just about sitting and having kids sound out words. Yes, that's a big part of it, but really just having your kids in a strong literacy environment, whatever that might look like at your home. And I think that sometimes escapes parents, that you may not think that your child is being exposed to language or learning, but just even simple things that you're doing with them in the home environment can really help them become better readers.
It's true. St. Louis was home of preschool education. Now, I'm not from St. Louis, but my husband was a teacher, and that was something that he told me about, because the more that a child is exposed to words and reading and literature, they come into school really with a huge advantage.
Yeah.
Because they're stimulated by those words. Students who have been reading or exposed to language before they come into school really have a head start, and that's why it was called the Head Start program.
Yeah.
One of the best things that parents can do, of course, is read with the children. And in the early ages, it's all about that phonemic awareness. Dr. Seuss was a genius.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Seuss books are perfect because it's sounds, it's spoken. Rhyming is one of the most important skills, because it also is teaching children about beginning sounds, middle sounds, ending sounds, and rhyming, of course, is based on ending sounds.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, if parents, it's funny because when I was teaching my son, and I know the libraries are closed right now, but when I was teaching my son to read a few years ago, I honestly found an entire set of the Dick and Jane books, and they worked wonderful with him. And yes, they had an entire set of them at the library here in our town. And it was very easy for him to fall into those books. And we don't have, if you're not in a school setting and you don't have like the early readers and the curriculum, the books that come with your curriculum set and all those things at your home, it's harder as a parent to just know what kind of book to pick up and work on with your child. And so I thought that was funny that he actually was learning from Dick and Jane, because sometimes those older readers actually do work. The simpler, the better sometimes.
They do. They really do.
I mean, and he was little. He didn't know, that it was old or anything like that. And, I think sometimes now I have 2 older children as well, but some of these early readers are so focused on current television shows and movies and toys. And I think sometimes we're so worried about trying to catch the attention of the child instead of trying to really get them to grasp the concept of reading. And I think sometimes it gets lost in some of those types of books. Those really have not worked for my kids, even though they might have, Spider-Man on the front or Avengers and say that they're an early reader. The way that they're laid out really doesn't fit trying to teach a child how to read. And so we've just had to find, some other options and things around the house, but even just involving your kids in discussions and conversations, wouldn't you say, can be beneficial to your child?
Oh, absolutely. The Dick and Jane books would fall under that explicit instruction of phonics, but you referred to all the illustrations and things, so it's interesting that when there are a lot of illustrations, there's some advantage in that there is an association between the word and the picture that represents that word. But you can also fall in the trap of sort of depending on sight vocabulary and guessing what the words are based on the pictures. So we really do have to be careful with a lot of those books that we're exposing students to at a young age. we might think that the student is actually reading when in fact they're guessing about the subject and what the
Mm-hmm.
words are based on the pictures that they're looking
Mm-hmm.
at.
Yeah. Or memorizing words and just sort of skipping through
Yep.
because they've memorized the book.
Yes.
Which, sometimes can be a great confidence builder, because every now and again when my son, who's been reading now for about a year, he will still get frustrated if it's a challenging book. And so sometimes I will go back to a book just to build up his confidence and make him think that, you can read, you can be a fluent reader. And we'll go back to a book that maybe he's memorized or he knows or that he really gets a kick out of, or that he loves, and then move back up to a more challenging book. So I do think that there is some weight in letting children read the same stories over and over, because it does give them an opportunity to recognize words and feel confident as a reader.
Well, it takes a lot of practice to read.
Yes.
And you want students to feel successful when they're reading. In fact, it's when students struggle with reading, particularly at a younger age, then they associate reading with being something unpleasant.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't ever want, obviously, that to happen. So the the key to reading is mastery, and that's what makes it difficult for teachers to teach 20, 25, 30 students, because
Mm-hmm.
mastery occurs for different students at different times. And the most successful readers are those who practice something. For instance, that sound symbol association between letters and symbols, and working on those 44 most common phonemes.
Mm-hmm.
But ideally, students practice one phoneme at a time until they've mastered it, and then they go on to the next. And in a classroom, the teacher doesn't know when that mastery for that student has happened. But it's better to have a student stay on something and read it over and over again to get that sense of proficiency and success, rather than taking them on to the next skill too early.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Because like you said, you don't want kids to get frustrated and upset and think that it's just hard work and they can't do it. It needs to be an enjoyable thing for
Yep.
them. And for most kids, I think it is. I think that our teachers in our school systems and all of our parents that teach from home and homeschool do an outstanding job, of teaching kids how to read. And, I think that we're hopefully seeing a little bit of a close in some of the gap that we have in students being below level. But now that everyone is learning from home, and we've got students who are possibly right in the middle of learning how to be a better reader, but now they're at home. So we don't want these kids to really stop learning how to read or to take steps backward in the learning process. So what are some things that we can have parents doing at home with their students who, the libraries aren't open?
Right.
They're probably not wanting to spend a lot of money to buy all these new books. So what are some things that parents can be doing at home to really try to help their child continue this learning process of reading?
Well, obviously, read to the students, but also have students read aloud to you as the parent. Now, if you know what those 5 components are, those 5 pillars of reading: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. When a child reads out loud to you, you're able to then ascertain which skill is lacking. If the student can't sound out a letter, then it's phonemic awareness. If they aren't sure what the letter or the letter combinations are, then it's phonics. If they can't do the both at the same time, then it's fluency. And again, that fluency is the same thing as automaticity, being automatic. We want that sound symbol connection, the decoding, to come automatically, so that vocabulary and meaning and comprehension can happen. So reading aloud is one of the best things that you can do with your students, and then gently provide guidance and feedback. If there are any errors, correct them gently, but we really want that reading aloud will tell us where the weakness is, so you know as a parent what to work on, which of the 5 components, and then just keep reading to them and have them read to you until you are hearing the student read with fluency, and then you know that mastery has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go on to the vocabulary, the meaning, and the comprehension. Now,
do you have any tips or tricks or secrets about, you have a child, they just absolutely hate to read, they don't want to do it, they want no part of sitting and reading with you? What are some gentle nudges or some things that possibly we could do or our parents could do to help kids get over that hurdle? Because there are kids like that out there.
Oh, there are, and then what's sad is once students are left behind in reading, they kind of stay behind. In fact, just today, it was perfect timing. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, who does a national assessment every 2 years of the achievement levels in reading and math for students. The results actually were just released. But the NAEP reading proficiency, I'm sorry to say, is going down, and it's getting worse every year.
Really?
In 4th grade, we now have only 35% of students who are reading at a proficient level or higher.
Now, did you say the national, and is that the information that you sent me earlier?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the national percentage right now of 4th graders.
It is. It's the national average of 4th graders. And I encourage all of you in a school district you can look at the school report cards and find out what percentage of students are reading at grade level. And you'd be shocked at the difference in schools and school districts. That the emphasis has to be on reading. Now, at 8th grade, that percentage drops. Not significantly, but we only have 34% of students nationally. This blows my mind. Only 34% of 8th grade students in our schools in the United States can read and understand grade level text.
What do you think that is attributed to?
Oh.
Or is that a whole nother podcast?
Well, everything. I mean, it goes back to when the children are 2 and 3 years old. It really does, because when students come into school, if they are lacking that exposure to reading, then their confidence is not there. Their vocabulary is not there, which affects their speaking ability, their writing ability, and their ability to learn. And if you are in 4th grade and 65% of the students in your classroom don't understand the textbook, then you don't keep using the textbook. Now, I've got every educator and administrator in the world angry with me.
Right.
But it's true. And I think part of the issue is we have been so driven by curriculum that is outdated, quite frankly. A lot of curriculum still teaches whole language, which it does not depend upon explicit phonics. It depends on a lot of guessing. And so part of the problem is outdated reading curriculums. A huge part of the problem is for most schools and school districts, reading is taught as a subject up to grade 3.
Mm-hmm.
Grade 4 and beyond, reading isn't taught as a subject. So if you're not a proficient reader,
so yeah, it's just too bad. We're going to move on.
Yeah, you're going to move from 3rd grade into 4th grade. If you're not a proficient reader, then you fall in that 65% of students who now aren't understanding your grade level text and curriculum.
Yeah.
And once you fall behind, it's almost impossible. The average reading level for a struggling 6th grader is about a 4th grade level.
Yeah.
The average reading level for a high school student is about the 5th grade level. So once you fall behind, it's almost impossible to get caught up.
And you're right. It's hard to play the blame game because, do we blame parents because they're not getting their kids ready? I've worked in enough schools and worked with enough kindergarten teachers and heard enough conversations about these kids are not coming to us ready. They're already so far behind when they even come to kindergarten. So it's like, are the teachers not teaching what they need to be teaching? We're using outdated curriculum. They're not providing teachers 4th grade and above how to even understand and teach kids that come to their grade level that aren't reading any, at a grade level. Right. And, then we've got parents or teachers that are blaming the parents that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing at home. And so it kind of just ping pongs back and forth, but there's never really a fix to the overall issue.
And you haven't mentioned the fact that so many of our students, well, in the days that we could go out to dinner, which was, like a lunch.
It's so far away. But, I forgot what that was like.
Really. But it killed me to see young children, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, with phones in their hands instead of books.
Yeah.
And that is an issue. And I confess that that's difficult for me to say since my background is education and technology. But the technology has taken over children's and young kids' time.
Well, and don't you think the types of books too, Becky? Because, we were just having this conversation the other day that my son, who is in the 6th grade and is an avid reader and can read books at his level or probably above, but sometimes when we go to the bookstore or to the library, it's really difficult to get a current book that is not a comic book sort of writing, silly, there's not a lot of substance to it. There's so many books like that. And I don't know. I wonder sometimes if the types of books that people are writing and selling are really not lending themselves to teaching kids how to be better readers, because you can only read so much into a Diary of a Wimpy Kid book, right? I mean, I love the books. I think they're genius and they're funny, but that's sort of the type of book that's out there these days.
Well, but keep in mind that in order to sell books, you have to sell books that 65% of the kids can't read.
That's true.
So that's why those graphic novels are so big, and everything is loaded with pictures.
Yes.
Because the students are relying on the picture and the graphics to tell the story, not their reading skill and ability.
Yep.
And one of the things, I mentioned that having children read on books and devices, particularly at a young age, is really not a good thing.
Right.
And there's a recent study that came out, and I found this fascinating when I was working in schools with reading interventions. We're seeing that children are really having a hard time with eye tracking, meaning tracking across a line of text consistently from left to right. And research has been there's been quite a bit of research now on the I study movements, and they're finding that those students who read a lot of digital text or especially play a lot of games, when you're looking at a device and you're playing a game, your eyes are going up, down, back, forth, all over looking for whatever puzzle piece or person is going to attack you or
Yeah.
whatever.
Right.
And the your brain, your eyes have muscle memory. So when you go to reading a line of text, if you're on a device, the research is saying that the students on a device are not reading text in a linear manner across a line of text from left to right. That they're looking at text and their eyes are going back to that habit of sort of skipping around and looking for words that are familiar that they can pick up quickly, rather than tracking properly line by line from left to right consistently. So these eye movement studies and eye tracking is something else that a parent can do with a student who's struggling. Literally use your finger and guide the student consistently from left to right. And if you find that there are starts and stops or pauses or stopping to sound out, or there are words that are skipped, that's a huge issue. So don't, libraries are closed right now. So perhaps some houses getting hold of books on paper are tough. I know a lot of the reading that teachers are doing with students right now are online. But I want to raise the red flag for all the parents that research is saying that students don't read text on a screen as well as they read text on paper. So work with your kiddos on eye tracking.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's been rough on us because we are used to going to the library. That was a weekly trip for us just to kind of generate new books and new topics in the house. And I mean, I have to say, I'm probably just as guilty as the next parent that, we have kind of veered into the websites such as, Books and Epic and a couple of these other things. But, it is true that they definitely don't have the same effect that just holding a book and sitting and pointing to words in a book and turning the pages and talking about, the words and how they align with the pictures and things like that. There's just no comparison to that. But I know right now it is hard for parents to get to the library and to get more books.
It is. But
so
the other thing is when you're reading on a screen, there's usually something else always going on, which is a distraction. And it's going to draw your eye there. And then it takes away from the comprehension. So reading books on paper, the focus and intensity and concentration is higher. So you're going to understand more of what you read.
Yeah. Well, a couple of little things that I want to throw out there for parents before we sort of say our goodbyes. If you're around the house, I mean, a couple of really small things that you could be doing. Obviously, Becky mentioned just reading daily, reading something to your children daily, reading books to them, sharing in that, sitting and reading books together. If you have the possibility to have a wide array of books, kind of stretched around the house. I saw a good tip one time, and I can't remember quite where I found it, and I did find that it worked really well. I started to display books in the most unlikely of places. Like I would display them on the kitchen table before breakfast, right? I would just have them as, books that could stand up on their own. I would put them in the windowsills. I would put them on the fireplace mantle, on the coffee table. And it would intrigue my kids to be like, oh, why are those books there? I think I'll grab one. So just having like colorful books on display and just like random places, I think will encourage kids just to like pick one up when they're just sitting there and they notice it. So that's sort of just another little tip.
And have the TV off.
Turn it off.
Turn off the TV.
Turn it off. I know it's hard to say now because, it's funny. My husband and I were just having this conversation that I have 3 boys and they're all 9 and up, almost 10 and up, if you can imagine. And so there's not a lot else to do, right? And so it's like, we're watching TV, we're playing video games, and we're on the computer, and they were doing this. But unless we're sitting outside or going for a walk, it's like that's just where we are right now. And I told him, I'm like, the screens are driving me crazy because we go from video game screen to computer screen to educational screen to TV. I'm like, just turn it off, just disconnect for a while. But it's hard.
It worries me that there's not a lot of learning going on these days.
Really, there's not, Becky. And I think
and I'm guilty of it too.
It's so hard sometimes, but all we can do is hope and pray that these kids turn out half as good as we did, I guess.
Well, remember when we used to sit at the breakfast table and read? There were cereal boxes. We'd read the cereal box.
Yeah. We were talking about that, weren't we? They don't have, they have stuff on cereal boxes now, but it's not the same. It's kind of all that silly, nonsensical, whatever, Yeah,
and there was some cereal that had like, you'd open the perforation and it would have pages that you could. Mm-hmm. I don't remember what that was, but that's genius. We need to go back to that.
Yeah. Or like Dad would be sitting at the table reading the paper or something.
Yeah.
Somebody was reading, but not anymore. Everybody's on their phones now looking at stuff. So another podcast, Becky.
There you go. Now, I liked your idea too, of putting the index cards up.
Oh, yeah. So that's something else that we did with my youngest son, who's actually on the spectrum. And so he's, about a year behind in his reading. But what we did with him was we actually I labeled index cards when he was younger and just put them on random things like bathtub. I'd get a Sharpie and write the word bathtub really big on an index card and stick it on the bathtub. Sink, kitchen, counter, refrigerator, stove, table, chair, window, whatever. And so he would always see the word and associate it with the thing at a younger age. And so that really seemed to help him get a better hold on the language. So that's something else, you can do that's super simple.
And then take some of those index cards and have children sort of assemble them and make sentences.
Yes.
Stories about it.
Yep. Get some sentence strips. You can get those on Amazon. They're super cheap. Parents, some really long sentence strips. Get a sentence strip, write a sentence, chop it up, jumble it up on the counter, have your kiddos put it back together in order to create a sentence. Yeah. So it can be a lot more simple than having to spend lots of money or, order a bunch of stuff. It really can be. So hopefully
for young students, you could even just have index cards with the individual letters so that the kids can move letters together to make different words like cat and cat and chat.
Yeah. And like you said, it really is a simple process. Once you get a grip on the 5 pillars, you kind of know what to do and you don't need to spend hundreds of dollars on curriculum.
It is. And there's, if you Google, here we go back to the computer. But if
you can't get away from it.
The 5 pillars of reading. Or there's a great article that came out recently called Get Reading Right. Mm-hmm. So parents, teachers, if you Google those 2 things, the 5 pillars of reading, or this article, Getting Reading Right, what the science says, it just a little bit of that, understanding those 5 core skills, how they work, how they have to integrate together, is really all a parent needs to make reading fun. And it's good for the kids to understand it. We're going to talk about phonemic awareness. You have a funny story about that phrase.
Oh, my husband?
Yes.
Well, I almost brought it up when you said sound it out. So, I don't know, a few weeks or a month or so ago, we were talking about reading and whatever. And I, because I homeschool all three of my kids. And so when he comes up in the evenings, he'll say, how the kids do today. And we'll kind of talk about what they did in school and blah, blah, blah. And I think I said the words phonemics or phonemic awareness. And he kind of just looked at me blankly and was like, I don't know what that is. And I was like, how do you not know what that means? And he said, well, when we were in school, when we were kids, we didn't use the words
No.
phonemic awareness.
Nope.
And so we had that whole conversation. It kind of went back to what you and I were talking about. That's not what they said back when we were in school. They said sound it out, or they used other terminology. They didn't say we're going to do phonemic awareness.
Right.
We're going to sit down and work on phonics today. They didn't use those kinds of words.
No, they didn't.
And so, yeah, it's funny though, that's why I'm glad at the beginning you mentioned just, it's basically just a fancy way of saying, sound it out, read what's on the page. What's the word?
Yeah. Such an important skill. So parents, have your kids read aloud a lot. Read to them, but have them read to you too.
Yeah. Just going back to the literacy rich environment, whatever that might look like for you, and that's a good place to start. So, well, thank you, Becky Jennings, so much. I always have such a good time with you on the show, and we have so many things to talk about.
We do. We'll have to come up with, there's lots that we can continue these conversations, but I always enjoy it. And of course, this is about helping the parents and kiddos at home. But what's that old phrase? Reading is fundamental. But read. Let's just get our kids reading. Turn off the TV. Put away those screens. And if you can read, you can learn. So that's such an essential task. But this has been fun, and I hope it's helped.
Yeah, I'm sure it has. And this is Kristy Houle signing out for this episode of Classroom Matters.